2,000, said the creditor. And the girl. That was the bargain, Ashby. And I've come to collect both. And the Duke of Wrexham, who had stopped his horse in the lane only to ask the way, found himself the unwilling witness to the sale of a human being. He had not meant to be there at all. He was riding home to Wrexham across the bleak December country, had taken a wrong turning, and had pulled up in the yard of a shabby manor to ask a servant for directions, and had heard, through the open door of the house, raised voices, and one voice among them that stopped him cold, a young woman's voice, low and steady and terrible, saying, "I will not. You may take the furniture and the plate and the horses and the house itself, but you will not take me, because I am not a debt, and I am not for sale, whatever my father has promised you." The Duke of Wrexham was not a sentimental man. He was, in fact, widely held to be a cold and formidable one, the Iron Duke of the North, feared for his hardness in business, and his shortness of temper, and his general refusal to be moved by anything. But he was also, underneath the iron, a man with a rigid and unbending sense of what was owed and what was owing, a man who paid his debts to the farthing and expected others to do the same, and who held, above all things, that a debt was a matter of money, and money only. And the thing he had just overheard offended that sense so deeply, so fundamentally, that he was off his horse and through the door before he had decided to be. The scene inside was quickly read, a shabby genteel drawing room, stripped of half its furniture. A weak, sweating, ruined man, Ashby, evidently, the master of the house, collapsed in a chair with a bottle at his elbow, unable to meet anyone's eye. A hard, prosperous man in a good coat, standing with a folded paper in his hand, and the smug patience of a creditor holding all the cards. The man who had said 2,000 and the girl. And between them, standing very straight, white-faced but unbowed, a young woman of perhaps 22, in a plain dark gown, with a great deal of dark hair and a pair of gray eyes that blazed with a fury and a fear held so tightly in check that the effort of it was visible. "Your father's own hand," the creditor was saying, tapping the paper. "Signed and witnessed. He owes me £2,000 he cannot pay, and rather than see him in a debtor's prison, I have been generous. I have offered to cancel the whole of it in exchange for his daughter's hand. It is a handsome offer, girl. You'll be mistress of a good house. Better than the workhouse, which is where you'll all go otherwise. Your father has agreed. The only signature wanting is your consent. And consent, my dear, is a formality I am quite prepared to dispense with. The magistrate is a friend of mine. Now stop this play-acting and—" She said no, the Duke of Wrexham said. Every head in the room turned. The creditor's smug patience curdled into a front at the sight of a large, dark, expensively dressed stranger filling the doorway. "This is a private matter, sir, and no business of—" "I heard it from the lane," the Duke said, coming into the room, "which makes it, at the very least, a public nuisance. And I find I am making it my business, because I have just heard a man propose to buy a woman against her stated will, using her father's debt as the currency, and that is a thing I will not stand in a room and permit. Who are you?" "I am Josiah Kroll," the creditor said, drawing himself up, "and I hold this man's note for £2,000, and I am within my rights." "You are within no rights at all," said the Duke of Wrexham. "A debt is a debt. It is money owed, and it is settled with money, and it has nothing whatever to do with this young woman, who did not incur it, and cannot be used to discharge it, because she is a person and not a coin. Whatever her father signed, he cannot pledge what is not his to pledge, and his daughter is not his to pledge. That paper obliges Mr. Ashby to pay you £2,000. It obliges his daughter to nothing. Any magistrate who told you otherwise is a scoundrel, and I know every magistrate in 3 counties, and I will make it my particular business to inform them of your understanding of the law." He crossed the room and held out his hand for the paper. "Give it to me." Kroll clutched it. "Now see here." "Give it to me," the Duke repeated, in a voice that had made hardened men of business go pale across a table. "And tell me the sum, the whole sum, principal and interest, and I will pay it, now, this hour, and the note will be discharged, and you will leave this house and never trouble this family again. You want your money. I will give you your money. That is what a debt is for. What you will not have is the girl. Name the figure. Kroll's small eyes calculated. He was a greedy man, and greed, presented with the Duke's open purse, forgot its other appetites. 2,000, and it's been a great deal of trouble, and there's my time, and I will pay you 4, said the Duke of Wrexham. The room went silent. I will pay you double the debt, the Duke said, 4,000 pounds, on one condition, which is that you sign a full discharge here and now in front of these witnesses, surrender that paper, and put it beyond all doubt and all future mischief that this family owes you nothing, and that this young woman is free, wholly free, bound to no one, owned by no one, sold to no one. 4,000 pounds, Mr. Kroll, for a 2,000-pound note, and the extra 2,000 is the price of my absolute certainty that you will be gone within the hour, and that she will never again have cause to fear you. Take it. It is twice what you are owed, and a great deal more than you will get any other way, because the alternative is that I pay Mr. Ashby's debt at its true value of 2,000, and then spend the other 2,000 ensuring, through every court and every acquaintance I possess, that you never lend or collect another shilling in the north of England. Those are your choices, 4,000 and gone, or 2,000 and ruined. Choose quickly. I am cold, and I have been riding, and my patience for men who buy women is very short. Josiah Kroll looked at the Iron Duke of the North, and understood that he was comprehensively beaten, and that he was also, by some miracle, about to be paid double, and greed won, as the Duke had known it would. 4,000, Kroll said, and a discharge. Done. Done, said the Duke of Wrexham. And it was done, the discharge written and signed and witnessed. The note surrendered, and, at the Duke's cold suggestion, burned in the grate then and there so that it could never resurface. The money to follow by the Duke's man of business within the day. And within the half hour, Josiah Kroll was gone from the house forever, 4,000 pounds the richer, and never permitted to darken its door again. And the young woman in the dark gown was standing free in her stripped drawing-room, staring at the stranger who had, in the space of 20 minutes, walked in from the lane and bought and burned the debt that had been about to sell her, and asked, so far, for nothing at all in return. She did not thank him. That was the first thing the Duke of Wrexham noticed about her, and it interested him more than gratitude would have. She looked at him with those blazing gray eyes, and there was no softness in them, no swooning relief, only a hard, bright wariness. And she said, "And what," she asked, "is your price?" "I beg your pardon," said the Duke. "Your price," the young woman repeated. 4,000 pounds is a great deal of money to spend on a stranger in a lane. Mr. Kroll wanted me for a wife. My father wanted me for a debt. Everyone in my life who has ever spent anything on my account has wanted something for it. And it has always, always been me. So I will ask you plainly, sir, and I would be grateful for a plain answer, because I have had a very tiring afternoon, and I find I have no patience left for discovering the price later. You have bought my freedom. What do you imagine you have bought it for? What do you want?" The Duke of Wrexham looked at her, this fierce, exhausted, undefeated young woman who had just been rescued from being sold, and whose very first response was to demand the terms of her rescue, to assume, on the hard evidence of her whole life, that no one gave anything for nothing, and that a debt paid was only a debt transferred, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time, which was respect, immediate and complete. "Nothing," he said. "No one wants nothing." "I want nothing," the Duke repeated, "from you. I want, in a general way, to live in a world where men do not buy women, and this afternoon it was within my power to prevent one instance of it, and so I did, and that is the whole of my price, and it has already been paid to me, in full, by the simple satisfaction of watching Josiah Kroll leave this house without you. You owe me nothing, not thanks, which you have very sensibly declined to give a stranger, not your hand, which is not for sale and never was, which is the entire point, not gratitude, not obligation, not 1 shilling of the 4,000, which I will not have repaid if you offered it, which you cannot, having nothing. You are free, Miss Ashby. That is not the beginning of a new debt to a new man. It is simply the end of the old one. You may walk out of that door this moment and never see me again, and owe me precisely nothing, and if that is what you wish, I will bid you good day and ride home, and be glad I took the wrong turning." He inclined his head. "I am the Duke of Wrexham, since you did not ask, and are plainly too proud to. And I did not free you in order to own you. I freed you because you were not a thing to be owned, and someone was about to treat you as one. And I happened to be passing, and I had the money, and it was the right thing to do. That is all. There is no price. It is the rarest transaction in the world, I grant you, and I do not blame you for disbelieving in it, but it is the truth." The young woman stared at him, and the Duke watched something move behind the hard, bright wariness. Not trust, not yet. She was far too battered for trust, but the first flicker of a thing she had plainly not encountered in a very long time, which was the possibility that someone might, just once, have meant her only good. "Rosamond Ashby," she said at last, grudgingly, as though the name cost her. "And I do not believe you. Not yet. Men who want nothing are rarer than you seem to think, and I have never met one, and I will believe in your no price when a year has passed and you have asked for nothing, and not one moment before. But," and here, for the first time, something in her fierce face cracked, just slightly, "but you burned the note. You burned it in the grate. Whatever you want or do not want, you burned the paper that was going to sell me, and I watched it burn, and I have not been able to breathe properly for 2 years, and I find I can breathe now, a little. And so, I will not thank you, because I do not yet know what I am thanking you for. But I will say that I saw you burn it, and I will not forget it, whatever comes. That is not thanks. It is only that I saw." "I know," said the Duke of Wrexham gently. "You saw. That is enough. That is more than enough. Good day, Miss Ashby. I hope your life is very long, and entirely your own from this afternoon forward." And he bowed, and turned to go. Genuinely to go, expecting never to see her again, having wanted nothing and taken nothing, and meaning every word of it, which was, though neither of them knew it, precisely the thing that would bring him back. He did not, in fact, ride away and forget her, though he tried. He told himself the matter was closed. He had done a right thing. The girl was free. There was nothing more owing in either direction. But the Duke of Wrexham found, over the grey weeks that followed, that he could not stop thinking about Rosamond Ashby, not out of the softness of pity, but out of something harder and more admiring. He kept hearing her, "What is your price?" He kept seeing the fierce, exhausted wariness of her, the pride that would not let her thank a stranger, the way she had stood straight in a stripped room and refused to be a debt. He had spent his whole life among people who wanted things from him, his money, his consequence, his name. And here was a woman he had handed a fortune's worth of freedom, who had responded by suspecting him of an angle, which was, he understood, the least flattering and most honest reaction he had received from anyone in years. She had not wanted his money. She had not even wanted his rescue. Particularly, she had wanted above all to owe him nothing, to be beholden to no one, to be free in fact, and not merely transferred to a kinder owner. And the Duke of Wrexham, who valued nothing so highly as a person who paid their own way and asked no favors, found that he had never in his life met anyone he respected more on so short an acquaintance. He made discreet inquiries. He could not help himself, and what he learned troubled him. Rosamond Ashby was free, yes, but freedom without means is a cold gift. The house was stripped. The father sunk deeper into drink and self-pity. The family's small remaining property mortgaged past saving. Rosamond had, within a fortnight of her liberation, done the only thing a proud, penniless gentlewoman could do. She had gone out to earn her living, taking a hard, poorly paid position as a companion to a querulous old lady 2 counties distant, and was, by all accounts, enduring it with the same fierce, uncomplaining dignity with which she endured everything. She had asked no one for help. She had certainly not applied to the Duke of Wrexham, whose £4,000 she had watched pay her freedom, and to whom she was determined to owe not one thing more. She would rather fetch and carry for a disagreeable dowager, on wages that barely fed her, than accept a shilling of assistance that might become, in the fullness of time, a price. The position was a hard one, harder than she let anyone know. Her employer, a Mrs. Craddock, was a rich, querulous, exacting old woman, who had gone through companions the way the Duke of Ravenshallow, in another county, went through governesses, because she was impossible to please, and enjoyed being impossible, and paid poorly, and demanded much, and had a particular talent for finding the tender place in a dependent's pride and pressing on it. She reminded Rosamond, daily and pointedly, of the reduced circumstances that had brought a gentleman's daughter to fetch her shawls. She made small, cruel remarks about the Ashby ruin. She worked Rosamond from before dawn to past midnight, and begrudged her the candle ends she read by. And Rosamond endured it, with a straight back and a level eye, and not one word of complaint, because she had made a vow, standing free in her stripped drawing-room, that she would owe no one anything ever again, and a hard, honest position that she paid for with her own labor was the price of that vow, and she paid it gladly. She would rather be worked to the bone by Mrs. Craddock, and free, than comfortable and beholden. It was not even a difficult choice. She had seen where being beholden led. It led to a creditor tapping a paper and saying 2,000 and the girl, and she would suffer a great deal of Mrs. Craddock before she would ever again put herself in a position where any human being could speak of her as a thing that might be collected. There was one night, early on, when it nearly broke her, when Mrs. Craddock had been crueler than usual, and the work had been endless, and Rosamond sat at last in her cold little room past midnight, aching and hungry and alone, and thought of the Duke of Wrexham's letter, the one that had said if she should ever wish for a correspondent, a plain, honest one who wanted nothing, she might write to him. And for one long weak hour she was tempted, not to ask him for money, she would sooner have died, but simply to write, to reach toward the one person who had ever treated her as though she mattered, to not be quite so entirely alone in the cold. Her hand was actually on the pen. And then she set the pen down, because she did not trust it yet, did not trust him yet, or rather, did not trust that reaching toward him would not, somehow, become the first link of a new chain. She had been free for exactly 6 weeks. She would not spend her freedom so quickly, or so cheaply, on the first cold, lonely night that tempted her. If the Duke of Wrexham truly wanted nothing, she reasoned, then he would still want nothing in a month, or 3, and she could reach toward him then, from strength rather than from weakness, when she was certain the reaching was a free choice, and not the desperate grab of a drowning woman. And if he did not still want nothing in 3 months, if the offer had been, after all, the opening move of some longer game, then she would be very glad she had not grabbed at it on a weak night. So she banked the fire of her loneliness, and went cold and hungry to her narrow bed, and did not write, and was proud of herself for it, and cried a little, quietly, where no one could hear. It was a full month before she let herself answer his first letter, and when she did, it was from exactly the strength she had promised herself. Cool, guarded, on her own terms, an experiment proposed rather than a rescue begged. She had made herself wait until she could reach toward him, as a free woman, and not a drowning one. And that, though she did not know it, was the very thing that made the correspondence possible. For a friendship or a love that begins from one person's desperate need is never quite free of the debt of the rescue, and Rosamond, with her fierce, unbending pride, had instinctively refused to let theirs begin that way. She had made him wait until she could meet him standing. It was the same instinct that had made her demand his price in the stripped drawing-room, and it was the making of everything that followed, because when love finally came to Rosamond Ashby, it came to a woman who had never once, not on her coldest, hungriest night, let herself be bought or beholden, and so it came, when it came, entirely free. And the Duke of Wrexham, learning this, was faced with a genuine difficulty of conscience, and it was this. He had come to care what became of Rosamond Ashby, had come, he was honest enough to admit, to feel a great deal more than concern, and he had the power to make her life immeasurably easier, and he could not use it, because to use it would be to violate the one thing he had given her, which was the certainty that he wanted nothing, that his rescue had no price. If he now descended upon her with gifts and positions and comforts, he would prove her original suspicion correct, would reveal himself, after all, as a man who had bought her freedom in order to purchase her regard, the price merely deferred. The very act of helping her would destroy the thing that made him worthy of her. He had trapped himself with his own decency. He could love her, but he could not court her by any of the usual means, because every usual means would look like the collecting of a debt. So he did the only thing he could do, which was the hardest thing, and the thing that in the end won her. He offered her nothing, and asked for nothing, and simply, patiently, made himself available to be known. He began by writing to her, not a love letter, nothing that could be mistaken for pressure, but a plain, dry, courteous letter, on the pretext of informing her that the discharge of her father's debt was fully and legally complete, and that a copy was enclosed for her own keeping, so that she need never fear Kroll again. It was the sort of letter one man of business might write another, and at the end of it, almost as an afterthought, he added a single paragraph that was not business at all, that he had thought often of their brief meeting, that he considered her the most admirable person he had encountered in some years, that he asked nothing and expected nothing, but that if she should ever wish for a correspondent, a plain, honest one, who wanted nothing from her but the pleasure of her conversation, she might write to him, or not, entirely as she chose, and that either way he remained her servant. Rosamond did not answer for a month, and then she wrote back, a short, guarded, dry letter of her own, thanking him with cool precision for the copy of the discharge, and adding, at the very end, in a hand that had plainly hesitated, "You say you want nothing. I have decided to test it. I will write to you, Your Grace, and you will write to me, and we shall see how long a duke can correspond with a penniless companion before the price appears, as prices always do. Consider it an experiment. I am a great believer in experiments. I warn you that I expect to be proven right." She was not proven right. That was the slow miracle of the year that followed. They wrote, first monthly, then weekly, then, before either quite noticed, near daily. And the Duke of Wrexham asked for nothing, and offered nothing but himself, his thoughts, his dry humor, his opinions, his genuine and growing delight in the fierce, clever mind on the other end of the correspondence. He did not send money. He did not send gifts. He did not use his consequence to ease her hard position, though it cost him agonies to know how hard it was, and do nothing. He simply wrote to her, honestly, as one free person to another, wanting only the letters themselves. And Rosamond Ashby, who had begun the correspondence certain it was a trap, and determined to expose it, found the trap stubbornly refusing to spring, month after month, until she was forced, against every instinct of self-protection she owned, to consider the possibility that she had finally met the one man in England who had told her the truth, that he wanted nothing, that there was no price, that a person could simply be given their freedom and then, separately, be loved, with no ledger between the two. They met, in the flesh, only twice in that whole long year of letters, and both times by her strict design, for Rosamond guarded the terms of the experiment jealously, and would permit nothing that might look like the Duke pursuing or pressing her. The first meeting she allowed was in the autumn, some 10 months into the correspondence, and it came about because the Duke wrote, with his usual scrupulous courtesy, that business would bring him within a few miles of her town in October, and that if, and only if, she should wish it, and thought it proper, he would be honored to call, for 1 hour, in the presence of her employer, with no expectation whatever should she prefer he did not. He gave her, as he always gave her, every possible avenue of refusal, and Rosamond, who had by then read 10 months of his letters until the folds wore through, surprised herself by writing back a single word, "Come." He came, and it was strange, and wonderful, and terrifying, to sit across an hour from the man whose mind she had come to know so intimately on paper, and had seen in the flesh only once, a year before, in the worst hour of her life. They were awkward at first. The ease of the letters did not immediately survive the crossing into a small parlor and a watching dowager. And then the Duke said something dry about the Dowager's appalling wallpaper, exactly the sort of thing he would have written. And Rosamond laughed, and the paper ease, and the flesh and blood suddenly became one thing, and they talked for the whole hour, as though they had been talking for years, which in a sense they had. But it was the end of the hour that Rosamond kept, for as the Duke rose to go, precisely on the hour, having promised 1 hour and being a man who kept his word to the minute, he paused and looked at her, and said something she turned over in her mind for weeks after. "I want to tell you," he said, "that this hour has been the great pleasure of my year, and that I should like nothing in the world so much as another. And I want to tell you, in the same breath, that I ask for nothing, that you must not feel, because I have come, and because I have said this, that you owe me a second hour, or a warmer letter, or anything at all. I say it only because it is true, and because I have made honesty the whole basis of whatever this is, and it would be a kind of lie to have sat here an hour so happily and pretend on leaving that I felt nothing. I felt a great deal. That is all. You need do nothing with it. Good day, Miss Ashby." And he bowed and left, exactly on the hour, having laid his whole heart on the table, and then made certain she felt no weight of obligation for it whatsoever. And Rosamond stood at the window and watched him ride away, and pressed her hand to her chest, because she understood that she had just been shown, again, the thing she had never believed existed, a man who wanted her, and said so, and yet somehow left her more free than he had found her, not less. She wrote to him that night, and for the first time her letter was not guarded at all. "I have decided to stop pretending," she wrote, "that this is still an experiment. The experiment concluded some months ago. You passed it. I have simply been too proud and too frightened to admit that the thing I was testing has become the thing I most look forward to in my life. So I will admit it now. Your hour was the great pleasure of my year as well. I should like another. I should like a great many. There. I have been as honest as you, which is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I find the sky has not fallen, and I am beginning, slowly, against every instinct I own, to believe that a person may perhaps be honest, and unguarded, and even hopeful, and not be punished for it. You are teaching me this, one letter at a time, and I do not think you even know that you are doing it, and it is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, greater even than the £4,000, because the £4,000 only made me free, and this is teaching me how to live free, which is a much harder and much rarer thing." The Duke of Wrexham read that letter perhaps 40 times, and carried it inside his coat for a month, and understood that he had fallen entirely and permanently in love with a woman he had met twice, and held to his patience anyway, and asked for nothing, and waited, because he had promised her freedom, and he understood by now that the waiting itself was the truest form of love he could offer a woman who had spent her whole life being unable to trust that anyone would. For she had begun to love him. She fought it. She was as proud and as guarded as any heroine in these tales. But a woman cannot correspond daily for a year with a man who is honest and clever and kind, and who has proven over and over that he wants nothing from her, without her heart betraying her, and Rosamond's heart betrayed her thoroughly. She lived for his letters. She read them until the folds wore through. She found herself composing replies in her head as she fetched and carried for her querulous dowager, and the drudgery grew light because there was a mind waiting at the end of the day to meet hers. She loved him, and she was more frightened of that than she had been of Josiah Kroll, because Kroll could only have taken her freedom, whereas love, if she let it in, and was wrong about it, could take something she valued even more, which was her hard-won certainty that she was nobody's for the buying. And the thing that finally broke the deadlock, that forced them both past the careful, patient stalemate of a year's honest letters, was, of all people, her father. For Mr. Ashby, ruined and drink-sodden and sunk in self-pity, had heard, through the servant's grapevine that reaches everywhere, that the great Duke of Wrexham corresponded with his daughter. And Mr. Ashby, who had once been willing to sell that daughter to Kroll for £2,000, saw in this news not his child's happiness, but his own opportunity, saw that if the Duke could be brought to marry Rosamond, there might be, for her ruined father, advantages, forgiveness of the mortgage, a comfortable maintenance, a return to consequence. And so Mr. Ashby did the thing that nearly destroyed everything. He wrote to the Duke of Wrexham himself, obsequious and scheming, offering, as though it were still his to offer, his daughter's hand, hinting at settlements, proposing terms, treating Rosamond once again, exactly as he had with Kroll, as a piece of property, to be marketed to the highest bidder. And he made the fatal error of mentioning it to Rosamond, boasting of it, in fact, certain she would be grateful, so that she learned, to her horror, that her father was once again trying to sell her, this time to the very man she had come to love, and that the beautiful, honest correspondence, the one true thing in her life, was about to be dragged into the mud of a transaction after all, exactly as she had always feared, only now the price was being named, not by the Duke, but by her own father, behind her back, in her name. Rosamond did the thing her whole hard life had trained her to do. She moved to protect the one good thing she had, by giving it up before it could be taken from her. She wrote to the Duke that same night, a cold, controlled, devastating letter, the hardest she had ever written, because she wrote it through tears she would not have admitted to shedding. She told him that she had learned of her father's approach to him. She told him that she was mortified beyond expression, that she had had no part in it and no knowledge of it, and that she would rather have gone to the workhouse than have her father hawk her a second time, to the one man who had ever treated her as free. And then she told him that the correspondence must end. "I began this," she wrote, "as an experiment, to see how long a duke could write to a penniless woman before the price appeared. You will remember. And for a year, you proved me wrong, and it was the great astonishment and the great joy of my life. And I will not pretend otherwise, since we have always been honest. But the price has appeared after all, your grace. Not from you, I acquit you entirely, but from my own father, who has done to us exactly what Kroll did, and has turned our correspondence into a marketplace behind my back. And I find I cannot bear it. I cannot bear to be, once again, a thing offered for sale, a settlement negotiated between men, a daughter marketed to a duke. It poisons the one honest thing I have ever had, so I am ending it myself, cleanly, before it can be made sordid. Because if I let it continue now, I will never again be certain, and neither will the world, whether you came to me freely or were sold to me by my father, and I would rather lose you entirely than have you on those terms. I told you at the first that I am not for sale. I meant it then, when Kroll was buying. I mean it now, when my own father is selling. The price has appeared. I am closing the account. Do not write to me again. And, thank you. There. After a year, I find I can thank you at last, now that it is ending, and there can be no price in the thanks. Thank you for the year. It was the only time in my life I was ever wanted for myself. I will keep it always. Goodbye." She sealed it, and sent it, and cried the whole night, and told herself she had done the only honorable thing. The Duke of Wrexham received it 2 days later, read it once, and ordered his horse. He rode through a hard rain the whole distance to the mean little town where Rosamond fetched and carried for her dowager, and he arrived wet through and cold to the bone, and entirely resolved, and he did not send up a card. He simply presented himself, a duke dripping on a querulous old lady's doorstep, and asked for Miss Ashby, and would not be refused. And Rosamond came down, white and startled and furious to see him, into the mean little parlor, and before she could order him out he spoke, because he had rehearsed it the whole wet ride, and he was not going to lose the chance. "You ended it," he said, "to protect it. I understand exactly why, and it is the bravest and the most wrong-headed thing you have ever done, and I have ridden 90 miles in the rain to tell you so. Sit down, Rosamond, please. Hear me, and then if you still wish me gone, I will go, and I will not trouble you again, because I have spent a year proving I will take no for an answer, and I will not stop now. But hear me first." She did not sit, but she did not order him out. She stood, rigid, her arms wrapped around herself, and let him speak. "Your father wrote to me," the Duke said. "Yes, an obsequious, scheming, contemptible letter, offering me your hand as though it were his to offer, hinting at settlements, proposing to sell me the thing he once tried to sell to Kroll. I received it a fortnight ago, He held her eyes. I burned it, Rosamond. In the grate. The same grate's worth of ashes I made of Kroll's note a year ago. I did not answer it. I did not entertain it. I did not treat with your father for one instant, because your hand is not his to sell, and I would no more buy you from him than I bought you from Kroll. His letter changed nothing, because there was nothing in it that had any standing. You are free. You have been free for a year, and a free woman cannot be sold by her father any more than she could be sold by her creditor. And I know that better than any man alive, because I am the one who made you free. So the price you fear has not appeared. Your father named a price. I burned it, exactly as I burned the first one. There is still no price, Rosamond. There has never been a price. Your father is a scoundrel, as scoundrels tend to remain, but he cannot make our year into a transaction unless we let him, and I decline to let him. And I have ridden 90 miles in the rain to ask you to decline as well. Rosamond's arms had loosened, very slightly, around herself. But the world, she said, unsteadily, even if you burned it, the world will always be able to say that my father sold me to you, that you bought me, first the debt and then the daughter, that I schemed my way from Kroll to a duke. Let me tell you what I have decided about the world, the Duke of Wrexham said, over a year of writing to you, and a 90-mile ride. The world said Kroll was within his rights, and the world was wrong, and I did not let the world's opinion stop me from burning his note. The world will say your father sold you to me, and the world will be wrong, and I do not propose to let the world's opinion stop me from what I came here to do either. I have spent a year being the one man who did not treat you as a thing for sale. I am not going to let the world or your father or your own hard-won and entirely reasonable fear take that away from us now. Because the answer to a lie is not to give up the truth, Rosamond. The answer to, he bought her, is to marry you so plainly, so publicly, and so obviously for love, over so long and so honest a courtship, that the lie cannot stand. And I mean to give the lie no purchase at all, which is why I am not going to propose to you today. Rosamond blinked. You are not. I am not, the Duke said, because you have just this week been sold by your father and released yourself, and your heart is raw. And if I asked you now, in this parlor, 2 days after that letter, you might say yes, out of relief, or out of the wreck of your defenses. And then, you would never be entirely certain, and neither would I, whether you chose me freely, or fell into me, because you were exhausted, and I was there. And I will not have that. I have spent a year ensuring that everything between us was free, and I am not going to spoil it at the last by asking the question at the one moment your answer could be doubted. So I am not proposing. I am doing something better. He took a breath. I am telling you that I love you, freely, having burned every price anyone ever tried to attach to you, and that I intend to go on loving you, and writing to you, and courting you openly and slowly, and in the full light of day, for exactly as long as it takes for you to be certain, all the way to the bottom of your wary heart, that when you say yes, it is your own free choice, and no one's transaction. A month? A year? 5 years? I do not care. I have the patience. I proved it. And on the day you come to me, not out of relief, not out of gratitude, not out of exhaustion, but freely, wanting me, certain, on that day, and not one moment before, I will ask you the question, and you will already know your answer, and it will be yours, entirely yours, the first entirely free choice of your whole hard life. That is what I came 90 miles in the rain to say, not marry me. But I am not going anywhere, Rosamond, and I want nothing but you, and I will wait, in the open, for as long as your freedom requires. The correspondence is not ending. I decline your ending. I am beginning something better instead. Rosamond Ashby stood in the mean little parlor and looked at the Duke of Wrexham, dripping and cold and utterly immovable, who had just declined to buy her one final time, who had refused even to propose, lest the proposal itself become a kind of purchase of her raw and grateful heart, and she understood that she was being offered the one thing she had wanted her whole life and never once been given, not to be chosen, but to be allowed to choose, freely, in her own time, with no price and no pressure and no ledger anywhere. And a strange thing happened, which was that the moment she understood she was free to wait, free to take 5 years, free to be certain, free to choose in her own time. She found that she did not need the time at all, because the only thing that had ever made her hesitate was the fear of being bought. And a man who rides 90 miles in the rain specifically to refuse to buy you has, in the refusing, answered the only question that mattered. "You impossible man," Rosamond said, and her voice broke, and she was crying and laughing, both at once. "You have ridden 90 miles in the rain to tell me you will not propose to me. Do you understand how absurd that is? You have made the not proposing into the most conclusive proposal any woman in England has ever received. You have proven you want nothing by refusing to ask for the one thing you want. And now I am standing here certain, completely, freely, all the way to the bottom of my weary heart certain, precisely because you refuse to make me certain, and I find I do not want to wait 5 years, or 1 year, or 1 more day, because the waiting was only ever a defense against being bought, and you have just made it impossible for me ever to be bought, and so I have nothing left to defend against." She crossed the little parlor and took his cold, wet face in her hands, the fierce gray eyes blazing now with something entirely new. "So I will do the proposing, Your Grace, since you have so cleverly refused to. I love you, freely. It is my own choice, mine, the first free choice of my life, and I am making it now, in a mean parlor, with no father and no creditor and no price anywhere in the room. Marry me, not because anyone sold me to you, because I am free, and being free, I choose you, and there is no one on this earth who can say otherwise, because you made sure of it. Marry me, you impossible, honorable, rain-soaked man. That is my answer, and it is 1 year and 90 miles overdue." And the Duke of Wrexham, who had come to refuse to propose, found himself proposed to instead, freely, by a woman no one had bought, and it was, he said ever after, the only proposal in England worth the hearing, because it was the only one he had ever known to be entirely, unpurchasably free. They were married in the spring, and the Duke of Wrexham did precisely as he had promised. He married Rosamond so openly, so proudly, and so plainly for love, after so long and so public a courtship, that the lie her father had tried to tell, that the Duke had bought the daughter along with the debt, could find no purchase anywhere, and died for want of anyone willing to believe it against the evidence of their own eyes. Her father was not at the wedding. The Duke had settled, coldly and finally, a modest maintenance upon Mr. Ashby, enough that he need not starve, administered by the Duke's own man so that it could never be gambled or drunk away, and had informed him, in a single private interview, that he would never again refer to having arranged his daughter's marriage, never again present himself as the architect of her good fortune, and never again treat her as anything he had the power to give or sell, on pain of losing the maintenance entirely, and that if he ever, by word or hint, suggested to anyone that Rosamond had been bought, the Duke of Wrexham would make the north of England as cold for him as it had become for Josiah Crowell. Mr. Ashby, who was a coward, understood, and troubled them little thereafter, and Rosamond, who had every reason to hate him, and did not, quite, because hatred was another kind of chain, and she was finished with chains, visited him twice a year, coolly and dutifully, and otherwise lived her free life entirely out of his reach. And that free life was, by every account, a joyful one. The Duchess of Wrexham brought to her marriage the one quality her hard years had forged in her and never broken, her fierce, unpurchasable independence. And the Duke, far from resenting it, cherished it above every other thing she owned, because it was the quality that had made her love, when it finally came, a thing freely given rather than bought, and a man who has been wanted for his money his whole life knows exactly what that is worth. She was no one's ornament, and no one's possession, and no one's debt. She ran the charities of the estate with a particular ferocity toward one cause above all others, the relief of women and girls who had been, as she had nearly been, sold. Daughters pledged for debts, wives trapped by ruin, any woman whose freedom some man held for sale. There was no such woman within the Duke of Wrexham's considerable reach that his Duchess did not fight for, because she had stood in a stripped drawing-room and heard herself named as the currency of a debt, and she had never forgotten what it was to be a person turned into a coin, and she spent the whole of her free and happy life making certain that as many other women as she could reach were set, as she had been set, at liberty. "You paid double," she said to her husband once, years on, watching their children play in the garden of a house that was entirely, unpurchasably her home. That first day, 4,000 for a 2,000-pound note. "I have always wondered, why double? You could have freed me for the two. Why pay twice what the debt was worth?" "Because," said the Duke of Wrexham, 2,000 would have paid the debt, but 4,000 paid for something the debt could not measure. It paid for certainty, for finality, for the absolute impossibility of that man ever coming back. I did not want to buy your freedom, Rosamond. I wanted to buy it so completely, so far past any doubt, that no one could ever unbuy it, that the extra 2,000 would stand forever as the plain proof that your liberty was not a transaction I might someday call in, but a thing I overpaid for, precisely so that it could never be a debt. I paid double, so that you would never ever owe me. It is the best 4,000 pounds I ever spent. It bought a woman her freedom, and then, because I was wise enough not to attach a price to it, that free woman, in her own time, entirely of her own choice, bought me. There is no better bargain in the world than that, to give a person their liberty, expecting nothing, and to be freely chosen by them after. I would pay it 10 times over. I would pay anything. It was never really about the money. It was about the one thing money cannot buy, and can only, if you are very lucky and very patient, make possible, which is to be loved, freely, by someone no one could sell.